headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Now, time to say a very, very good morning to Richard Taylor, who's come all the way in from Wales, as I like to
sunny
call it.
Wales, Mike. Yes,
Yeah.
the land of Mark Drakeford, the Emperor.
Listen,
Still
and already the weather is great. I mean, I woke up this morning. I always like to see a blue sky, completely cloudless blue sky, a little bit cold, but really lovely. Really gives you a feeling of sort of optimism, doesn't it?
Well, it lifts your spirit.
It does.
We had the weather yesterday was terribly.
That was awful.
Well, it reminded me of being back home. I arrived down last night. Of course, coming down to see you, of course, always a pleasure, never a pressure.
Yes,
right?
absolutely
On the home
right.
of common sense. And
yes.
Not much common sense happening in Wales, though. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the latest. The National Museum of Wales has gone really woke. Now they want to cancel steam trains.
Yeah, what's all that about?
Well, the creator of the steam train, which was actually the first steam train that run, was in Merthyr Tydfil, believe it or not, a place called Penydarin.
Right.
And the actual creator of that was a Cornish bloke who created the steam train. No links to slavery whatsoever, but because steam trains were used to ship slaves historically, the National Museum of Wales decided that they need to cancel steam trains and relabel them and everything else. It's ridiculous when you consider as well the National Heritage Museum in Wales has an exhibition to Black Lives Matter placards. I mean, you can't write this stuff, and we're seeing more and more of it. Statues being taken down, street names being challenged in Wales. This is all under the Emperor Mark Drakeford, and you know what I think about him. So
I mean, Drakeford, he went off to Brussels the other week, didn't he, as well? What's he going over there for?
Well, it's a non-devolved issue. It's got nothing to do with him at all. They've got an international office, apparently, that does all that. And, taxpayers are paying for this, something that really we do not need. It's not up to him to go to Ukraine or anywhere else to negotiate with European leaders on behalf of the Welsh people. No. I mean, we don't want him to go there. We want him to get on with poverty in Wales.
We've left the, pop quiz, Mr. Drakeford. We've left the European Union. You've got no business going to see them.
No, well,
simple as that.
Well, he's never got over the fact that we've left the EU, has he? Let's be honest. The guy is really wounded by Brexit, and the amount of times that I've mentioned it on the show with you, Mike.
Yes.
He just can't accept it. But not just him. We've seen it with politicians here in Westminster as well. They're still wounded by it all, aren't they? Let's be honest.
Yeah.
And I've been watching the whole thing unfold, with Ukraine, and it's amazing to see how many people have been virtue signalling, especially those on the left as well. But not just those on the left, those on the right. Everybody's not doing it. Celebrities are doing it. But where were they when the bombing was happening in Yemen, when the UK government was sponsoring, arms to the Saudis? They weren't taking the knee then. It's just an opportunity, really. And I think it's put a lot of people off and made them turn against Ukraine. Well, I've literally seen it.
I mean, I was saying yesterday, and I started off saying it on Monday, this idea that 100,000 people plus have all come forward. Most of them will never see anyone from Ukraine. Most of them haven't got a clue what they're doing. Most of them are just doing it so they can tell their neighbour, oh, have you put your name down? Have you put your name down on the thing? Now, I know that you're very much more on the side of those who are doing that, but I just think a lot of it is cobblers. A lot of it is just people making up that they're going to be good people and they're going to do something.
Well, look,
what about the home? Why aren't they helping the homeless?
Well, of course, you've got to help the vets on our own country and our doorstep first. I understand all that. But, of course, on our screens constantly from mainstream media, of course, we're getting the Ukraine story. And so we should to a certain extent. And I don't buy everything that the media tells me, which I've been accused of, Mike. But here's the difference. I had someone, when I mentioned about Putin, what he's doing is murderous and he's evil for doing it. That's my opinion. I'm entitled to it. Listeners might disagree with it. But he's killing innocent women and children, bombing citizens.
Right.
I put it out on Twitter, and a lady responded, saying, here's the problem. Putin isn't bombing people. It's all smoke and mirrors, fake news and manipulation, as was with COVID. This is a media war. I mean, I'm like, what planet are you on?
I know.
People are denying even that there's a war happening.
Well, I'm getting a lot of these nutters as well who are coming on to me saying, why are we not hearing both sides of the story? I'm like, which both sides of the story do you want? There's one side of the story where a bloke is running a country and he's invading another country and killing innocent people willy-nilly, right? So the other side of the story is what exactly?
But the argument is this, well, what about what they've done? Donbass, they mention that, and the neo-Nazi stuff. No, I get that.
Yeah, but it's
I
all
know,
Russian propaganda.
But it doesn't justify killing innocent people.
No,
this is the part I can't understand. And people who were, against lockdown, who were against all the kind of restrictions the government placed, are pro-Putin when he is taking protesters off his street for speaking out against the war. People have lost all sense of perspective, Mike, over this Ukraine thing. Now, I'm no expert, which I don't claim to be, but some people do. It appears to me as if they've moved from being experts on COVID to being experts on war.
But the point is, the reason you can always tell, and I always say this to people, I've been a journalist for a very long time, right? I have a right and the ability to be able to look at things and work out whether they are real or not. because that's my expertise.
Yeah.
People say, well, what are you an expert in? Well, I'm an expert actually in news, and I can tell you for one second that I know exactly when somebody's given me a load of propaganda. And the reason you know that what these people are spouting is propaganda is they're all saying the same thing. They're all talking about, the neo-Nazis. It's like, why do you suddenly care about neo-Nazis? You didn't care about them when they were in Hungary. You didn't care about them when they were in Russia, where they were quite in quite large numbers. But now suddenly you care about neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and you keep telling me that there are biolabs in Ukraine where they're building biological weapons. And you're going, where are you getting all this stuff from? They're all getting it from the same place, and it's all an absolute and utter shambles.
Yeah, and I think as well, what hasn't helped, Mike, and you know this, we've covered this story many times, is that the misinformation that put out by mainstream media of the last 2 years over the COVID stuff, which we know, over numbers of with COVID, all that kind of stuff, convoluted numbers. Then we've got, celebrities now, I mentioned at the start there, virtue signalling. And when we see that, when people see that, they go, oh, we can't believe it because it's mainstream media.
Yes.
I think you need to take a step back for a moment and realise, in the midst of all this, the rights and wrongs. Of course, Ukraine has got history. Which country hasn't? But it's a sovereign, independent nation that's being attacked by a foreign power.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, and I've said this before, might have been on this show, Mike, but I've said it many times before. If Putin does succeed in what he's trying to do there in Ukraine, how far is he prepared to go? Now, I don't want to escalate it. And, I've said it before. We don't want to escalate.
But this is the other thing. You can't win, because if you say we've got to stop him, then they accuse you of wanting to start World War III.
That's ridiculous. He's got to be stopped at some point. Look, what history has taught us something. We've seen what's happened in Germany, for example, in history, without going into too many details. You've got to stop these tyrants, these dictators, from taking over independent, sovereign nations like this, because if we don't, what deterrent is it to him for any government to say there's nothing we can do because our hands are tied? Because that's what they're saying. USA, UK, I get that, I understand that. We don't involve ourselves in war.
Yeah, but they've also been saying it for a while. They said it about Crimea. They said it about Georgia when he went in there. Yeah. They said it about South Ossetia. And basically, when Russia went into Afghanistan the first time, before we did, nobody batted an eyelid. Everybody went, oh, okay, then we'll just not do anything, shall we?
Yeah, but what kind of message does that send out to Putin? One of the best deterrents you have is you never tell your enemy exactly what you're planning to do. Right. If you tell him, we're not going to respond, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, then he's going to continue doing what he's doing. Yeah. Even the peace talks, during peace talks, they were bombing civilians in Ukraine. They're not peace talks. There should be a ceasefire, withdrawal, then peace talks begin. Yeah. So I don't know what the end game is, but I know that I wouldn't trust Vladimir Putin as far as I could throw him.
No, absolutely right. And he's not to be trusted. And he is, in fact, a dangerous individual. And I can't believe that there are so many people who seem to be swallowing the Russian propaganda that somehow, he's not in the wrong. How can he not be in the wrong?
Well, clearly he is, and I think as well you've got the European nations that have been so reliant on their energy. For example, 40%, I think it is, they're taken into the EU. I mean, luckily for us in the UK, I say luckily, it's around 4% of our gas will be taken from there. But I think, we're over a barrel on that, especially because the government have gone down this net zero green agenda, which is a big monster in my opinion.
Ridiculous.
And it's just ridiculous. And he's taken out because we can't be in the middle of a crisis, a fuel crisis, and be talking about net zero and renewables. They'll take years and years and years to catch up, to get to the point where people can afford it, firstly. But right now, people are being pushed into huge amounts of poverty. They can't afford their bills, and the government is still talking about renewables. And we're paying a green subsidy, which is about 20% or something like that. Tax, on VAT, which we were told as part of Brexit, Boris promised in his manifest that they'll be able to get rid of that. So why isn't he doing it? Why isn't Rishi Sunak looking at the crisis? I'll tell you for why, Mike. It's because politicians don't care in Westminster. They're looking at a salary increase about $2,000 a year. That'll cover their gas and electric bills.
No, but it doesn't need to, because they get those paid as well.
Yeah.
I mean, they get their expenses paid. This is the trouble. Most of the people now running this country are so kind of isolated from everyday life that they don't know what anything costs. I mean, when was the last time you think Boris Johnson filled up his car with petrol? He probably doesn't even have a car, because he's got a little bike that he likes to drive around in, and he's got his obviously his Range Rovers. He's got a fleet of Range Rovers, by the way. I don't know if you've ever been around the back of Downing Street.
I was there yesterday, actually.
You go around the back of Downing Street, there's literally about 25 Range Rover Sports, all top spec, 150 grand a piece. Not one of them, I would imagine, is electric. And they drive around in these all day, telling us that we shouldn't be driving around.
Yeah, well, they live in they live in a completely different world to the rest of us here in society. Let's be honest. Especially in Wales, for example, the poverty levels are so high. I mentioned it before. Deprivation under Welsh Labour for 2 decades under devolution has been a disaster for the people of Wales. NHS in crisis, public services, the list goes on, yet it doesn't affect them because throughout the pandemic, Mark Drakeford was on £126,000 a year. I mean, almost as much as the Prime Minister, who's looking after 60 million people. He's got 3 million people in Wales. I mean, the disparity is just incredible.
Really
I don't understand why politicians can't just for a moment take a step back, come into our communities in Wales, go to the north of England, go where there's real poverty, and have a look at what your policies are doing to hard-working, ordinary people.
Absolutely right, because the one thing that Devolution has managed to do is to turn one lot of people against another lot of people while we pay for it through the nose. Can you imagine how much devolution has cost? Setting up the Welsh Assembly, which is now called the Senedd, setting up the...
It's the Senedd, Mike.
Senedd, hello. I mean, I had a mate who lived in Chepstow, right, an English guy. He couldn't believe that he was having to pay his taxes to get his daughter, who was essentially English, educated to speak Welsh, because it was compulsory.
Well,
you couldn't opt out of it.
Yeah,
you have to learn Welsh, don't you?
Yeah, it is compulsory.
That's ridiculous.
But I'm patriotic. I like the Welsh language. I mean, siarad y Timmy bach y Cymraeg.
Yeah, but
I speak a little bit of Welsh.
Well, then you'll be able to get a job at the BBC then. That's all it's good for.
The BBC Wales won't have me, mate. I can tell you now. There's got no chance of that happening. Yeah, I mean, look, and we're seeing now new policies, by the way. Drakeford and the Devolution, I was talking about a tourism tax. I don't know if you know that. So if you're planning on visiting Wales, folks, just be aware you might have to pay an additional tax because, of course, there is something about...
Well, I always used to make a joke when I worked down there that you had to pay to get in on the Severn crossing, but you didn't have to pay to get out.
Well, I think the French
owned that
bridge. The French owned that bridge, didn't they?
Do they?
I think they did, yeah. We paid them off. It was a big debt that we owed them. I think it's been paid off now. Yeah, you did have to pay to come into Wales, but that wasn't going to Drakeford. But the tourism tax, I mean, we need tourism. It's going to put people off, Mike,
Yeah, it really is. And Wales is a wonderful country. I'm a big lover of all sorts of parts of Wales that are tremendous, although once you get a bit far west, it starts to get a bit weird. Llanelli in
Mike,
particular.
Behave yourself. That's my hometown.
And the Scarlets and all that. But Scotland, right, there's a story coming out of Scotland today that Moray Council, or Murray Council as they pronounce it, is saying that anti-English racism in Scotland is as bad as Islamophobia, and they now may have to make some kind of law to make it impossible for you to be anti-English. I'm not in favour of laws against the way people think, generally speaking, but this is the whole idea that the SNP have nurtured this for weeks and weeks and months, and over the course of the pandemic, the whole independence argument has fallen apart, so they've now just turned people against the English.
Well, this has been replicated in Wales. The Welsh Labour, the SNP, the bedfellows, if you look at their policies under devolution, they're very much similar. Sturgeon and Drakeford, if you look throughout the pandemic, the way they handled it, they were both kind of anti-Boris, anti-Westminster.
Let's do more, let's do it longer.
And there's masks still in place. We've still got COVID restrictions till the end of this month, the 28th in Wales. And I think we've seen that sentiment there. But Wales under Drakeford calls itself a nation of sanctuary. So it wants to be, immigrants and refugees, great. But then it seems as if they don't like the English. Anything they can do. They don't want the English buying second homes, for example, in Wales.
But they've always had a problem with that, haven't they?
Of course they have.
The Plaid Cymru lot, who used to run the BBC, I don't know if they still do, but they were all about cottage burning at one point, weren't they?
They
were. I'm sorry if this is upsetting anybody, but that's what they did.
They were, and Adam Price came out, I think it was Guy de Fawkes reported on it. They talked about being a nation of sanctuary, and since 2017 up until the present time, I think all Plaid Cymru council areas have taken in 5 refugees.
Really?
So, it's virtue signalling on another
5?
level. Yeah, 5.
That'll be great.
That's it, yeah.
I mean, that's not even a dinghy fault, for heaven's sake.
Let's not mention dinghy, shall we?
Good talk. Hot talk.
Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.